If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. But what happens when the things we measure most carefully are precisely the wrong things? My guest today is Roberto Rigobon, professor at MIT and founder of the Billion Prices Project. He's a super creative economist whose work is influential on the problem of how we actually know what's happening in the economy. Here's our talk. Welcome to the Economics of Work. I'm excited to welcome Roberto Rigobon, professor at MIT, founder of the Billion Prices Project, and someone that I think of as, hope this title is okay, as the king of measurement. Roberto, welcome to the show.
Yeah, good. That sounds like a SNL, episode.
No, it's deserved. So you can wear the crown.
No,
So
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 thank
uh,
you, man.
yeah, for sure. No, as someone like with that title, I mean, I think of so much of what we measure in terms of economic statistics as really coming from surveys, primarily. So at least in the U.S., but most of the government data, most of the economic statistics we rely on are based on surveys. So what do you think is being missed across the board? Through surveys being the primary way that we collect data.
So I think that the biggest problem we have had are two. One is people have stopped responding to surveys. So, I mean, uh, I am old enough that I remember they used to call my home to get a survey,
Did you
and I
participate
remember,
when they called you?
yeah, yeah. Well, yes, I participated, but actually, my mom was super excited. Always like, "Oh, they're calling! This must be important." so, so people responded, and today is the wage of engagement have changed so much, and people do not respond. I just run a survey. This among clients of a U.S. association, which is for soybeans, and they gave me about 2,000, close friends. 45 responded. Like, that's unthinkable. So the first statistical office has that issue, and then the second one is that the economies are transforming the products much faster than before. So when you think about clothing, for example, I mean the products are churning every 4 weeks. So whatever method you used to have for surveying is not working anymore. I mean, so I cannot imagine people that are estimating the demand nowadays. They will have a nightmare because I mean, whatever you estimated 2 months later is useless. So, for the firms, even for the firms to make decisions based on a focus group, or has to be kind of useless nowadays. So these two things have changed. So we have to change the way we gather the data as well. So those things are missing. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, so on that first point, like if we have declining response rates, like in some way you might think, all right, that's fine. We have smaller samples and we just like increase the sample size through surveying more or whatever. But it's more problematic if that 45 out of 2,000 that responded are not representative. And
Yeah.
as response rates get lower, there's more concern of non-representativeness. So do you think it seems like survey respondents really need to deploy all sorts of sampling weights and like stratification techniques and whatever, like tons of tools, which are kind of the same tools as they would have to deploy if they collected that data not through surveys. So what is the alternative? Like how do we get data, in alternative ways, and then can we deploy those same techniques to adjust for sampling bias and low response rates and stuff like that?
Yeah. So then you're correct. I mean, I do not think that the low response is randomly distributed. So it is actually self-selection, and that implies that that data is as biased as the one that you will collect from other sources. So I like the division that Bob Groves has. He was head of the Census of the United States, where he defines the data as design data versus organic data. So the organic data is the one that people are very truthful in their answering. I mean, they don't even know they're answering a survey. This is your everyday breadcrumbs that you drop when you are interacting with the internet, or when you're interacting with any type of business nowadays, or technology. And those breadcrumbs are severely biased, but they're breadcrumbs of actually your proper behavior. So that's a very important source. And I think that the survey plays a role for the correction of that data. So you have to have like a hybrid approach. I think that's my view, is that you use the data that you collect from surveys, that is going to be much smaller, representative. You're trying to kind of gather a little bit what the bias could be, and then you just deploy the data that is very fast moving and very broad and easy to collect, and it's very truthful. I think that the very important part of that one is truthful. I mean, we very rarely write a random set of words in ChatGPT or in Google. I mean, like we are searching for something. So I am just telling you what matters to me. So when you do a job posting, I'm telling you what I want to collect from that, what is matters to the firm. And so in that sense, I think that data, this organic data, is the way you interact, is the source that we should use. But then use the survey as a way to correct it, because this is severely biased. That's the only problem. So that hybrid approach, I think, is the key.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, we analyze at Revelio, we analyze a lot of labor market data, and I like that these things like job postings and LinkedIn profiles and stuff, like they're economic artifacts. Like people have a very high incentive to be truthful because they are pursuing some economic objective. But it seems like at least from my vantage point, but I imagine yours too, there's a fair amount of resistance from the conventional people that are used to analyzing traditional government statistics. So one, I want to hear a lot. I want to hear about your billion prices project and how how you what that was, but also how you thought about resistance to that and how you reacted to that.
That is so interesting. So I work for 10 years, okay, in the advisory committee for the census. And then I have the opposite reaction. I think that they're very open. Yes, but it's just that very slow. So what an interesting observation. So let me put it this way: this division about organic versus design data is super profound to me. I actually think about the design data. You are thinking about representativeness before you start. In the organic data, you're just thinking about truthfulness before you start. You would like something that has both, just that is not available. So this hybrid approach that I have pursued all my life comes from working with people in the census that I thought they were super advanced.
Interesting.
It's super interesting. So now the issue is the following: is so first they are governed by laws, not by so so the liability of producing a statistic that is incorrect for the BLS, for example. Yeah, I mean, from the social point of view, it's just extraordinary. I mean, I have seen countries that they manipulate the data of inflation rate, and that has an incredible social impact. Imagine countries with high inflation rate, a little bit what is happening to the United States now, where our inflation rate is reaching 5%. No? When we get to 5%, you know what is going to happen? All wage negotiations are going to start indexing to that number, 5 and 5 and 5. And it just gets perpetuated. So if I make a mistake at 5 on the upside, it's much worse than doing a mistake of 5 on the downside. So that non-linearity, statistical officers are really scared about the implications of the non-linearity of the measurement problem. When the inflation rate is 1 or 2, it's kind of irrelevant. It's not a big deal. But when you're getting to 10, 12% inflation rates, making a mistake on the upside affects pensions, affects the wages, affects. So, I mean, just think about how this gets ingrained in the contract, in the social contract of the country. So, all the pensions will need to be indexed and so on. So this is just an example of inflation rate. The same happened with employment. I think that the mistakes are very non-linear, and that creates a huge amount of fear. So the census, I might not have this number correct, but because they started before I got there, okay, and they actually finished this process while I was in the advisory committee. They spent more than 12 years, something like that. I mean, I think that that's the number. Thinking about how to make the census to be collected on a phone. And those are 10 questions. Give me a break. 10 questions. And I and they said, like, if we screw this up, we don't have a census for 10 years. We have the wrong political system for 10 years. We have the wrong social, expenditures for 10 years. I mean, like, you understand the consequences. So So they are super. I actually have an incredible appreciation for the US Statistical Office and the European one as well. That they are super advanced, but they don't want to screw up. And so I think that that's the part. And then the other part is that they have to report to politicians, and politicians understand these things way less than them. So when you talk to a politician and you tell them about lack of representativeness, they have no idea what you're saying. Like, they understand the words separately but not put together. So so someone in the statistical office is trying to explain that they need to do a bigger effort to collect the data from single mothers, for example, the politician will not understand why that matters. Is that okay? They say, well, you just send a question and get a question. So I think that that's the reason. But yeah, but
Yeah,
eh,
well, let's say, do you think
yeah,
there's a distinction between the creators of these data sets? So let's say if you're creating it, you really want it to be right because the stakes are high and all this. What if you're just a practitioner of the data set? So, if you are looking at the inflation numbers and the job numbers, and you're, let's say, a journalist or a pundit or you know, or an economist, um, I get the sense that from practitioners, there's a strong desire to treat some data as if it's ground truth when it really might not be. There's
yeah, that is
messiness in
correct.
every piece of data, but I get the sense that there's some appetite to just not want to worry about measurement issues and just take something as given so that you can just like have clean hands and say I did everything the proper way.
It is exactly. So that's so someone in the statistical office of the United States will never say let the data speak for itself. And never. Never. Okay. They will say, no, 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 wait a second. No, no. Which data do I want to be talking? No, it's not a random. So that's one that they will say. But you're right. I mean, people are trying to find pieces of information else everywhere. So I think that that's the approach. The private sector says, or someone like in finance will say, like, give me any information that adds value, and I will treat them accordingly. So now, when you think about it from the finance point of view, I think that that approach is okay. So, because what you want to say is that, well, do I have any information that I can use in addition to what the statistical office is giving me? So the question is, can I create something in this data that will allow me to predict what the statistical office is going to say? I think that that approach is correct. When they treat that data as ground truth, I think they're making a mistake. So you see, I think there's a difference of saying, can I get any information from this data that is valuable? And I think the answer to that, that's a good approach. So I think that maybe yes. But saying, oh, this new data is what the reality is reflecting. And I think that that's being too optimistic about the data. Um, I do an exercise in class where I show them, I create a data set that has 100 trillion observations, okay? And I show them that that data has the same statistical properties as 32.
Wow.
And I said, okay, we're going to just change slightly the sample selection. And it's actually 2% correlation only. And you just change 2 to 2.5, and the actual equivalence of the data is of 30 observation. So I tell them, well, 100 trillion is 30. So, you can ask 30 people randomly and they will do better.
It's so crazy. One thing, one of my big critiques on statistics in general, on how intro to statistics is taught, is this idea that your number of observations is kind of equivalent as the unit of variation. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you collect 100 trillion observations, they must be IID, they must be independent, and then you have statistical precision of 100 trillion. But really, maybe it's 100 trillion, like you know, whatever the entity is, in some like mega entity where there's really 32, and those 32 things really drive this variation. And I feel like we learn about clustered standard errors like way late in the game, like e- deep into grad school.
Yeah, and the intuition of the sampling, I find it fascinating. I do it with the height of the students. I take the students, I stand them up, and I organize them by height. No.
You
And I
actually do
said,
it, like
okay.
they actually
I
stand.
actually
That's
physically,
oh,
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
fun.
So I
Yeah,
take the students
yeah.
and I take 10 students and I just put them in heights from, and everybody's laughing because they know more or less what I'm doing. When I'm organizing them, it looks like actually and I do the whole spectacle. So I said, okay, what is the average? And then I took a ruler and I just start moving the rule. And then everybody like higher, higher, lower, higher, like what is the average, you know? And then I pick one person that is that height. So I take that person and put in the middle. I said, well, if I pick this one on the I said, let's do now sampling. And I said, let's pick one on the extremes. I picked the tallest one. And then I said, okay, uh, if we pick this guy, then the next guy has to be higher or lower than Ben. Let's assume that Ben, I just chose you, which you are the average. And people said, well, they don't think that the next one has to be lower on average because I just took the highest one. So the whole rest of the data is negatively correlated with the first choice. And and then I start doing that. And then I said, okay, let's do it again. Then I pick the small one. And then we start taking notes if the person that comes next is higher or taller or shorter than men. And it's just incredible. They realize that this is all negatively correlated. And I said, you see, these observations that you think they are random, they are not random. They are correlated. They are correlated based on this mean. So so I said, what is the only way to be totally random is to do this fully random, that you have with replacements. And I tell them, we don't do that in social science. I don't give you two checks in April of 21, okay, of 1400. We don't. We just give you, we just give one check for every family. That's it. And then or I ask you the question, I do the treatment to you, but I don't take you again. So the way we do social sciences and medical sciences for the matter as well is that we do it without replacement. So that already has a massive amount of correlation. The people don't realize that it is. So by using the height of the students, it's so visibly clear what happens. No, because I pick the top one, and then I pick, when they don't get it, then I take the second tallest, and then the third tallest, and then people say, "Oh shit, this is going below that rule." And actually, what I do is I ask the student to hold the rule, which is a very very long rule that I have from carpentry, and the person just holds the rule over his height, and he's just in the middle of the room, and you start taking the tall ones, and then it's priceless to see that people realize that the sampling that they think is so random, it is not. And then it's easy to motivate. But you are right. We teach these, especially to people that work in management, so MBAs. We always say more data is better. Always. And that might be true if the additional data that you're adding is IID. But if it's not, then we make these terrible mistakes. Again, because they don't understand the sampling, is what you said, is that they tend to think that this is the ground truth, and the outcome tends to be that they might be right for 90% of the time, but that 10% is what leads to bankruptcy. I think that there are more hedge funds that have been bankrupt because of big data than the ones that have been successful for big data. I
Really?
actually, I
Why? Are
think
you
so.
considering like the LTCM crash and
Well,
like the fallout from
well,
that?
that
Or
is interesting. So actually, LTCM will not be that. LTCM is the incorrect computation of a variance. I don't think they were into big data. They were into big modeling. But
yeah, I guess I'm
but
sort of equating those. Yeah.
yeah. But so no, no, but no, no. These are people that use satellites for computation of sales in the United States, in Walmart, something like that. And they think it's ground truth. I understand the intuition that 99% of the time the number of cars might be reflective of the number of sales, but that's not perfect sampling. So yes,
Yeah, so you mentioned that like there's different, there's different like there's different levels of quality of economic data that comes from the US, from, more emerging markets, in Latin America in particular. Like, do you think that there's like who do you think's doing this very well? Is there a paragon of successful data measurement that others should emulate? Or do you think we're not quite there even at the frontier?
So just to give you an idea, I think that the only statistic, the only one that we use as as a public good is that okay, this is a statistic for public good. I think that we use data for private sector decisions all the time, and that's fine. And there will be different type of mistakes. But the only public good data that is entirely based on sensors and kind of modern organic data is one in the Netherlands, which is when I tell you it's going to be depressing, it's simple, but there's a statistic in the sense of that computes how much time are you spending in commuting time, no? So it's a statistic time of use. And there's a part of that statistic that says, well, how much time are you spending in the train, how much time in the car, things like that. And the funny thing is that they actually do that with sensors. They put sensors about the engines of the cars when they're collecting the tolls, and they use that to compute the amount of time that you spend in your car and in the trains. Um, it's like a super stupid statistic. You will imagine, well, that sounds like a pretty good measurement issue. And indeed, they measure that. I have a funny story about that one because there was one day, actually, the parliament did not like that, by the way. That's interesting. The parliament hated that. So, and I know the person from the statistical office that actually designed it. So he has this number of cars, and the number of cars are going in every single highway and how much time they're spending. And then he's actually using techniques to reduce the privacy violation, which is a different problem that we can tackle because this is an important one from privacy protection. So he was using all these techniques that are hard to understand. So they hate it. They hated that. And they found one day, and this is your statistic must be wrong because on this particular day, there are only 16 cars on this highway. Amazing. So they spend this huge amount of time. They find a time in which this highway, there are only 16 people said so you so he my friend is like crazy trying to find out what is going on, why on earth the sensors did not work out on that particular day at that particular this was like a 4 or 5 hour window, and then he realizes that that day is D-Day. And that's where the memorial is. And Obama was going to give like a humongous ceremony. So they stopped the highway for 4 hours and there were exactly 16 cars.
Yeah, yeah, and it was just Obama and 15 others.
It was just like a decision. Okay, nobody's going to drive today on this highway. And so here, in order to use that data, we need to learn the, how to mask individual data so we protect privacy, okay, which is one of the points. This is super difficult to understand for people. I actually think it's very difficult to understand. Like, if you have a great data, why you want to make it worse? And that's always the example that I give about people height. If I know something about the first person that is above the mean, then I know the next one will be below the mean. So I just violated the privacy of the next person by knowing the first one. So I say, like, I'm sorry. It is very easy to do this. So when these people are very serious about doing these statistics, they spend a humongous amount of time um, taking this data that is a massive violation of privacy, uh, gathering in a way that can protect the privacy of the citizens, and then release it publicly. So I hope you understand why it's so difficult for these statistical offices to do that. So they do some techniques. The inflation rate is the best one. And I think this has been the whole work of Alberto and me I mean, I started in 2001, Ben. So you can imagine this is 25 years measuring inflation rate. So they are doing this at a smaller scale, like TVs, for example. They just take all the TVs and then they go to the electronics, gather all the data from the web, and then they replicate their methods on that data as opposed to go to the survey. That's the only extent where they have used this. And so, but the final number still is very survey based. So I think I think there are very few that actually have been produced. So that's the only one that I actually know that is public. So here, the implications are: first, the data has to be public. Second, that has privacy implications. Second, the cost of mistakes are very nonlinear, and third, it's easy to explain a survey. It's really hard to explain differential privacy. It's just like um, so there are some people in Congress that actually know that because I was not talking to them, but I was participant of those conversations, and you can tell that they kind of know. I mean, like they understand what the purpose is. Um, but the census, I think the first time they did differential privacy was about 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago.
Oh, wow. Interesting. But I mean, there's always some aggregation. Like that is not differential privacy, but it's close to that. People I think intuitively know that, if you gather data from a bunch of people and produce aggregates, it, masks the individuals underneath.
Yeah, but I mean, but on the other hand, the European Statistical Office produces more than 2,000 measures of inflation. 2,000. So this
Right. So you can de-anonymize that.
exactly just like it is hard. I mean, at the end, you know something. I mean, the BLS produces 1,400. Europeans produce more than 2,000. So labor. I mean, you work on labor markets. So I mean, you have the labor in every single city. So at the end of
Oh,
the day,
totally.
you
Even
yeah.
within a
So
firm. So yeah, sometimes it
yeah, and
really
within the
gets
firm,
down to, one person. You can easily,
yeah, yeah.
de-anonymize this.
So in that sense, is But anyway, so these are things that are the limitations. So the best statistical office, I think they're the slowest ones because they are far too important. Yeah. So to your first question, I do think that countries like Singapore, for example, are more willing to try things out. An emerging market, for example, that has huge amount of budgetary constraints on the statistics, they will be more willing to try things out and try something that might not look perfect, but is progress. They will try it out. So I love the Singaporean approach, the Hong Kong approach. These are smaller economies, and they're very prone to try different measures, and I mean, they suffer from the same issues, but I think the scale being small and not having $10 trillion being attached to their statistic makes life a little bit easier for them to try things out. But the very best are super slow because of this privacy. But I mean, like they are super concerned. Yeah, yeah. So there's such an interesting, uh, such an interesting dilemma because the ones that have the money and have the resources and have the human resources to do it and probably have the ability to do the experimentation, they will do it, but they will not tell you.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a bad equilibrium where you have, these conservative, slow-moving public statistics and also these fast-moving alternative data sources. Having both sounds pretty good.
Yeah. Again, central banking. I mean, the first central bank that did inflation targeting was not the US. In fact, actually, the US is not inflation targeting formally. Was New Zealand, Sweden, smaller countries.
Who was the first one?
Um, uh, the Swedish claimed that they were the first ones. The first one that actually coined the number was the New Zealand.
Oh,
So
interesting.
I don't want these two countries to be fighting. They are both in the World Cup, and maybe they will encounter each other. So I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
want to add, but the first countries, without a doubt, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Sweden. Those were at the forefront of this, where they said we need our central banks to be, have one single objective. The Bank of England came later, um, but then the US still is not an inflation targeter, not formally. Like all the discussion that we have today in the US is about labor market and inflation. And by the way, they're paying very little attention to financial stability right now. So they're kind of concerned, but too many objectives, very difficult for the Fed to do its job. So
Yeah, I mean, I think they're not even really paying attention to labor. Like, I think they're doing worse than nothing when it comes to targeting labor markets. Because like when inflation, so in an ideal dual mandate paradigm, then when labor markets are not in good shape, you'd want to be more accommodative, but they're actually less accommodative during those times, and vice versa. So it's like a really bad situation.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. It is a very bad situation. Yeah, this just shows you that. And again, the measurements are all over the place. No, and the labor market right now is a fascinating place to see the overreaction to bad measurement.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a really good segue into you kind of joining, the labor market conversation. I mean, you've done so much research and spent a large chunk of your career in international finance, and more recently, I think have been, focused a lot more on labor markets. So, to what do we owe the honor? I mean, why now?
Well, so no, it has been so interesting. So I have spent. I think I started in 2015 measuring human trafficking. So yeah, it's between 14 and 15. I started
Yeah,
thinking about
that's labor.
unethical. Yeah, exactly, unethical behavior of firms, and I started with human trafficking. Um, and this is it was personally very taxing. So at some point in time, after I realized that I had helped the authorities. There's no paper written. So in fact, actually, I didn't want to write a paper. It was actually about criminal behavior and trying to help um, um, organizations that are incredibly underfunded. So it was truly kind of social work, or charity, if you want, that I was doing. It was incredibly fascinating. It changed my life. So I cannot thank. And this all started with a question from a student, and she was just pretty good. I was talking about inflation and GDP measurement, and she said, "Well, have you thought about measuring human trafficking?" And the day I started thinking about labor, it was hard to think about anything else because truly GDP and inflation are important, but the marginal improvement on the measurement side is relatively small. We pay a lot of attention to this already. I realized that labor treatment, those we pay very little attention. We only count bodies. I mean, then we only count, are you working? Yes or no? Are you searching for a job? Yes or no? And by the way, that question we don't answer even correctly because it's not clear that we know what the person is doing and they are not truthful about answering the question. So we still do surveys in that area. And that's when I realized, I said, crap, this market needs a complete remake. That and carbon. So actually I'm working on two. Then I'm obsessed now with measuring our impact in, in general, both in society through labor markets and in the ecosystem through our actions. And we measure this is terrible. It's terrible measurement. Like, how can we make a good decision? That actually we wrote a paper that I think that about between 14 to 70% of the CO2 emissions lifetime have been underestimated. So we have way less CO2 emissions than, and
What
this is
what
super,
makes you think that? Like, what's the evidence behind it? Hmm.
well, it's super simple. The way we actually compute CO2 emissions is by asking firms to voluntarily tell us how much CO2 they are emitting. Only, only 20% of all the firms in the world tell you what their own emissions are. Now, who you think are actually telling you the emissions, the cleanest or the dirtiest ones? Like it's so just. I mean, you that know a statistic, you will say like, "Well, that's a stupid point, Roberto." Of course, the cleanest ones or the
So
regulated
how,
ones.
how do you how do you estimate that the extent of the sampling bias?
Oh, that's beautiful. We use. I mean, it's a missing observation, and so we have to do kind of a missing not at random, and we have to do models of imputation. So we we look at information like industry and your prior behavior, kind of number of workers, and so on. So we try to make an estimate. It's a terrible estimate, but it's better than assuming that the ones that are not reporting are identical to the ones that are reporting. So, but yeah, so this it was a it's actually it's a thesis from a Princeton student. Her name is Julia. She's a fantastic researcher. She just graduated. She started working right now and she's in Cornell. So her paper is beautiful, super simple paper, and again we are emitting 14%, 17%, between 14 and 17% less than what we should be reporting. So we're not producing 42 billion metric tons of CO2. It's a little bit more than that. it's closer to 50 than to 42, and So this is it. And then labor market was coming from the fact of again, eh, our our worst behavior tends to affect the workers the most in the private sector. And in the last 25, 30 years, I think, we have treated workers as if they are widgets. Okay. Since globalization started, we treat people as if they are just, you know, bolts and nuts. Just like it just
What's the
it,
relationship between globalization and the widgetization of workers, if you will? Like, why
wow,
are those?
what a great word. Well, it's because we found that we could do the same things in a different country, okay, that had much cheaper salaries. No, so at the beginning, is because the macro situation of that country implies that their salaries are smaller. But truly, the reason why their salaries are lower and their economy is in a recession or something like that, or they're in the middle of a crisis, is because their institutions are weaker. So when you decide, okay, let me move my factory to, I don't know, to China, you said, well, what, the question is, why are they cheaper? Like, why? Like, they're not more stupid than these ones. They're equally, you know, knowledge is the same.
Yeah,
The
we're
amount
all
of
equally
hours that they
stupid.
work
Yeah.
is, yeah, we are all equally stupid. Exactly. So like, so well, oh, they use child labor. Oh, shit, I didn't know. Like, what do you mean? Oh, I don't know if I can say that in the podcast. I'm sorry.
No, no, all good. You know,
So
yeah,
I said,
everything flies.
yeah. So I said, like, oh, I didn't know. I said, well, what you thought? Oh, they use, people in jail to produce. I said, well, I didn't know. Like, I mean, do your homework. So globalization was a cop out. You see, I said, well, it's not. I am not hiring any um, people or any firm that is using bad labor practices, but I don't check Bangladesh and I don't check, labor standards and the living standards and the working standards, and I just don't check. And so it was a way to say, well, if it's far, then it's okay. So environmental regulation, oh, if they are polluting, it's not my fault, and so it was a cop out, and globalization turned out to be incredibly effective. And then we realized, oh, we can do this with everybody. So let's do that now in the US with our own workers. And I think that we are continuously doing that, continuously. Just we create really bad jobs that have almost no dignity. And so it is, and I don't think, and our political system is responding to that. Everywhere in the world, we are more polarized. And both, this implies the right and the left, is that both will be more polarized. And, and this is just the fact that we are just not paying attention to how much hurt we're producing. Also, the consumer. Ben, let me add this to the consumer. In the US, in the last 20 years, we mostly have created monopolies. So we don't, this is so un American. We used to have competition everywhere. Um, the private sector was thriving on competition. But today we have no competition. We have no competition in the internet. We have no competition in provision of many services. We have no competition on the political system. We have no competition. So it's just when people tell me, oh, the US, um, uh, they criticize the US because it's too socialist. I say, oh, no, we're too monopolistic. What you don't like about the US is not that the markets are not working, is that we don't have markets. I mean, we just have places where we have one monopoly after the other. So, so those two things um, kind of have produced very bad social cost in the United States. So I listen to everyone in politics, by the way. So I always say, like, it doesn't matter how crazy the politicians sound. Um, Take that statement and try to understand if there's any merit in the statement. Actually, give the likelihood that there is some merit there. And if you do that, you will realize that you are not paying attention. And in the United States, we are not paying attention to a significant proportion of the population. We just treat them like, again, widgetization. Exactly. It's a very nice word, actually. And it's not surprising that they're upset. And they will be upset with any political system. So, I saw that happening in emerging markets. So it's just that in emerging markets we are more authoritarian in general. So when we people complain, we just crush them. And it's I come from a country, Venezuela, where we crush any dissident, like anyone that actually had any form of dissent with the system. It was crushed, and it was crushed all the time. So I mean, again, 26 years. You know.
Yeah, I mean, it's very depressing in some ways. Like I think the monopolization, is like a very, I'm very sympathetic to that idea that we have become more monopolistic, um, and have been crushing dissidents. The dignity thing, I'm a little torn on because let's say you have some countries that employ people with like low levels of dignity, whatever that means. Like let's say people who work in sweatshops in Bangladesh. You know, it's not obvious what the right solution to that is. Maybe they're desperate and they can't afford good working conditions, and we don't want to boycott, the workers in Bangladesh. That's the worst thing we could do. But we also don't want to support, the bad working conditions. So I don't know what the solution is. I mean, what do you
I
think?
know.
Yeah,
I know. The only solution is information, man. It's what you do for business. No, I
yeah.
mean, the only solution is information. Yeah,
So
that's
what
it. It's
information can we produce that would produce a better kind of pro
so,
worker,
so
you know?
yeah. So let me tell you an example that actually happened in my class. Okay, so I was giving one of the classes that I love the most at MIT, which is called the last lecture, which is the kind of the MBAs or the executive MBAs, is the last time that they're meeting, and they ask a professor to come and give them like advice. And I was just giving an advice, is exactly talking about human trafficking, and I was talking about all the nightmare that happens in human trafficking. And then one of my students raises the hand, so I'm going to call it it, so it's not identified. And that person says, "Well, I was in one of those fisheries that you are describing." And I decided to go there because I needed the income to save my mom. So like, what will be my option? What would be my option? And I said, the option is not to boycott that firm because then you will not be able to provide to your mother, which is exactly what you are describing, Ben. We create a social situation in which a person needs to do something that is either illegal, okay, or that is denigrating because we do not give the person another option. That's it. So the only way to do that is to highlight which firms are good and which firms are not. I think that that's the only way. Is that we consumers decide that it is okay to pay a little bit more for something that is organic. We do, okay. Every day we pay more for organic food. Well, what if we actually create information about the quality of the production of the supply chain and the firm for that product? I do think people will be equally sensitive. So I would love to have this fair trade or fair treatment of agricultural products, okay? To be something that is credible. But the information cannot be crap. Because if the information is crap, nobody will pay for crappy information.
That's what
But
happened
if
with
we
ESG, right?
exactly, Ben. It's exactly what happened to ESG. It's just like people buy their stamps. No, this is not about buying stamps. This is about actually producing data that is credible, that is representative, that has been collected in a proper way, in such a way that we know it's a signal, okay, that we know that this firm is doing things in a proper manner. It's not to sell things; it's that we have a verification. So the only solution is to highlight or differentiate the good behavior from the bad behavior. And then the consumers will make the decisions. So we give room for people that are struggling with, subsistence, okay, which is a little bit the example of Bangladesh. But we also will tell that firm that we're willing to pay more if they treat them better. See, that's the issue, is that we're thinking that the only decision that consumers have is about cheap. And I don't think that that's true. I think actually I'm very optimistic, Ben. I know that you were describing depressing. It's because challenges are hard, but we do know what the solution is. And I think that the solution starts from from trusting that consumers and workers care about these things. I know that people that work for you, they care about the quality of the information you produce. Is that okay? And the clients that buy from you, they care about the quality of the information you produce. So you do have the evidence clear in your hands that workers and consumers and clients somehow value veracity in your case. Is that okay? Quality and veracity. So, okay, let's do that for everything. Let's do that for a shirt. Let's do that for a tomato. And I don't see why we cannot. You see that my point is that I can provide the information. And by the way, we have to trust that the consumers and the workers are smart. We did once something at MIT that we did it only once as an example. We have something called a labor fair, okay, which is job market fair that the companies come and they present in the gym, no, and they have like little pots. Now the most, now, or the biggest one at MIT is the one on computer science, as you can imagine, no. So so that all the firms come, they actually pay and they finance all the party at the end of the program with this fair and this job fair. And what we did was to create a simple app that when the student was approaching one of the stands, it says, well, that stand is, I don't know, Google, just to put any example, no? And when you were approaching the stand, the app tells you, well, what were the CO2 emissions of that? Do that company has or not a plan for CO2 reduction? You just approaching the stand and it just tells you. It's like some environmental information. You know what? We had to stop because students reacted to that information, not to salaries. Students say like, wow, you don't have a plan for CO2 emissions reduction? Why not? And then the people in the stands, by the way, we told the people from the stand that the students were going to have this information. We didn't do anything. So we told them, so you better have an answer because if they are going to ask you, you better have an answer. So we tell you. They got very upset. I got these emails from companies I will not mention, but the company says, like, does MIT have a plan? I said, you know what? We don't. So I'm going to clarify to them that we don't have a plan either. So we are equally stupid. Okay. So I say, like you are. So that was
Wow,
my
I
answer to
couldn't
the
agree with
email.
that. That's so
And it's
funny.
amazing.
Yeah.
And people react to accurate information. Another example that we did about labor treatment is that we had this system about recording interruptions of students, okay, in a team. And I just showed them the data about interruptions. And, it was super inappropriate because I just organized them by nationality. I just organized men about nationalities. And you can imagine there are nationalities that we interrupt a lot, like me, Latino. So Italians are the worst, then the Spanish, then all the Latinos come. So we interrupt a lot. And then on their side of no interruption, you have the Japanese and the Germans and the Koreans. They never interrupt, no? So, and then I showed them the statistic of men interrupting women for each nationality. And it was interesting because every single nationality interrupted women 5 to 7 times more than they interrupted men. And I said, well, I am genetically designed to interrupt people because I am Italian, Spanish, and Latino. So, but I'm not necessarily designed to interrupt women more than men. So I don't see anything wrong with interruptions, to be honest, because I don't want to hear what the other person wants to say. So let me interrupt. Okay. So I find that interruptions are fun, but I don't find it funny to interrupt a woman more than a man. You see? So at least I would like to interrupt equally. You know what? That changed the behavior of the class instantaneously because people realized, crap, I didn't know I was doing that. And in fact, people started to apologize. And the ladies on their teams were saying, no, you are not interrupting me more. I said, well, I don't even know. But that statistic is telling me that I have to behave better. So I'm sorry, I interrupted you. And it's just incredible. Another one that I did in the class, then, which I did on the MBA, do have a lot of conversations in the class. So I am usually pointing to people, like, one and the other. No? So, I just point to people that have their hands up. It's not cold calling because it's all voluntary, no? So I once hired two arrays to compute. So I was going to do an experiment that I called the first person. So I said, okay, Ben, you start. But then you decide who continues the conversation. Okay. So, so And I computed, depending on the number of hands that were up, they were taking notes about the number of hands that were up, how many were men, how many were women, stuff like that, and who was calling who. So, not you will not be surprised that even though in my class there's 40% women, 45% women, it's a little bit less than 50 in that class that we did that year. Um, eh, Men were calling on men about 85% of the time. No, so conditional on, you have to adjust by the number of hands that are up. But surprisingly, women were calling on men about 90% of the time. So guess what happened? The number of women with their hands up started to go down and down and down and down, and then women never even raised their hands in my class. And on the eighth or 10th class, I had the time series and all the projects, and I just showed them. I said, "Look, how do you feel about this measurement?" And people said, "Well, first they were totally embarrassed, by the way." So they designated voluntarily. They said, "Okay, from now on, this will never happen again. We will not allow this to happen." So they designated one person for every class. That person was going to sacrifice his or her participation and was going to be on the board. And they had a little list: men, women, and they started to put a line. So when a man opens the word, they put a man, they count men, and then they're waiting for a woman to speak. And it was just fantastic. They created an institution to make sure that they will never going to make that mistake again.
Wow,
And
nothing like shame as a motivator.
well, or nothing like measurement. You see, so nothing like measurement to realize what it is. So I do think we can do so much better. And it requires the creativity about how to measure something that matters, that is hard, that typically people will not answer in a survey, Ben. I think that's it. In fact, let's think, so this can have a transformational impact, truly. It's just to think about something that people will not necessarily answer in a survey, at least not honestly. And let's think how we can measure and then just give it back. And again, we do privacy preservation because actually just average shame is well, it's good enough. And I do think that we're going to have a transformational impact. If we don't measure, then the only choice is cost. You see, if we don't measure labor treatment, the only cost. I mean, the only way I can decide is cost. So not surprising, I'm treating people like widgets.
Yeah. I really want to ask you about EPOCH also, but before I get to that, just because this is so fascinating, do you think if we are going to get there on this, measurement and validating firms and all that, do you think it's going to come from the private sector or the public sector?
Or private sector. Yeah, it's going to come from, yes. So it's going to come from, because the private sector is going to try to regulate, and I think that then it will be harder to uncover. So this will come from the private sector, truly, where we're going to think about something that has a social value, that the data has a social value, other than private value. I mean, you want to make money at the end, that's fine, but you also want to make sure that you are being rewarded because you are good. You see, so there's a coincidence. So that synchronization of objectives, I think, is just fantastic. That's why actually I think ESG, in principle, is a really uh, good attribute. I am measuring goodness, so so why not?
Yeah, you can make the case that ESG has been too governed. There was too much public sector involvement, and if it were just from the private sector, then like financial institutions would like, impose a little bit more, guardrails around consistency and measurement quality and things like that.
Yeah, and again, it's lack of transparency. So what I want the regulator to tell is that, well, you're going to construct something, you need to make sure that it's transparent. You need to explain people how you construct this. Then we would have realized that there were many of these measures that were shortcuts, and then we would have actually fixed it before we destroy it. So now it's totally destroyed. By the way, I'm part of the destruction side, so I should not actually.
Yeah, yeah. So am I.
but,
Yeah.
but, But people don't never read my recommendations on that. I mean, our recommendations in that paper were actually we need to work on transparency, but people never get to the end of that paper.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the headline is so striking.
Yeah,
Well, I hope someone does it, and if they do, then they should talk to me and you because we founded data companies, and it's a good business to be in. So I hope
yeah, it
someone
is.
takes it on and does it successfully.
Yeah, yeah.
So I really want to talk about EPOCH also because it's such a fascinating foray into work and what makes us uniquely. I don't know if it's really about what makes us uniquely human, or what makes us you know um, protected against automation. How do you think about what is EPOCH? Can you give a little summary and how you think about it?
Yeah. So this is the research that we have been conducting with Isabella Loaiza. She's graduating this year as well. Um, so Isabella and I started to think about a different question. Instead of thinking what the AI is going to do that we are doing, what are the tasks that is going to perform, we said, well, what this tool cannot do. Okay. So, and the reason is that I always thought that I have never asked the question, is a calculator substituting my ability to add and subtract? I said, like, I kind of don't care. Like, I know how to add, I know how to subtract. I barely remember how to do long division, but I am never concerned that the calculator is doing long division faster than me. I mean, I never found that to be an interesting question whatsoever. So when people were asking about what the AI is going to do that we are doing, I said that sounds like a stupid question. They said like, yeah, the bicycle makes me go faster, yeah, and the car as well, and the airplane, travel faster. It's not like I mean, at least the car. I mean, I cannot fly, so I understand the flying is providing something I don't do. But the car and the bicycle, I could have actually walked, and I decided no, it's fine. It's fine that somebody else does that for me. So what we did was to start thinking about this question differently, and we asked statisticians, we asked psychologists, we asked neuroscientists, what makes the brain different, and in a nutshell. Um, by the way, in the architecture, we're identical. So that's why I think computer scientists are so optimistic about the technology. Is because actually, neurons are a bunch of signals that come into one single place. There's an activation function that becomes one and zero, and the outcome of that neuron goes to another, another, another. And that's how our brain works, and how that neural network actually works. So they are architecturally identical.
Right. I think the AI extremists would say that as humans, we're nothing but computers. We're just firing neurons with electricity, and whether it's analog or digital, like who cares? We're
Who
we're we're all
cares?
computers.
Exactly. Well, actually, and transistors before were analog. So, and by the way, qubits are going to be analog. So so actually, quantum computing will be all analog. So yeah, that's right. But the issue is how we use the machinery differently. That's actually the interesting thing is that the AI is designed for optimization. We are designed to for control, not optimization. We're mostly on control. We control a situation, and that implies that we use the machinery very differently. So, in that control, the first thing that you have to do is to define boundaries of acceptable behavior. Okay. So, for example, when you have compliance in a company, they are controlling. They said, well, these are the boundaries of what acceptable outcomes, and we are going to be there. So I don't care too much where we are in that space, but we need to actually control with this. A relationship is created with controls. So when I develop a relationship with my wife, I am husband. I am not a friend. I'm the husband, and she's my wife. And my kids. I mean, you have two kids. I have two kids. So my kids, I don't care how cool I try to be. They don't think about me as cool at all. They said, "Oh, you are dad." I said, "Well, I'm a nerd." No, 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 no. You are not even a nerd. You are dad, and they know you're dad, and I know that. I mean, he said worse than nerd. Yes, exactly. So bad jokes and stuff like that comes with that. And so these are boundaries, and this is very important for us because as humans, that imply that the communication between these relationships are tailored by those boundaries. So you don't need a lot of data, Ben, to work. So if you go back to your professors, that you loved in college or in the university when you were doing the PhDs. So when one of these mentors tells you something, they give you a very small piece of data. Is that okay? I mean, if you think about the sentence as a piece of data, it's a tiny one, but you put a humongous weight on that. Humongous. So, so we, because of the way we operate in the development of the relationships, and in the fact that we kind of have boundaries on everything, allow us to operate differently than the computer. And it's not necessarily better, it's just differently. So we don't need a lot of data to process or make a decision. We can handle moral dilemmas. See, a computer needs to randomize for a moral dilemma. We don't. We are okay with the uncertainty because, again, we are doing this in a robust manner. So we operate differently, and also our brain is very. There's something called plasticity that implies that it changes with our own needs. So my kids are very good with addresses. Okay, so if we are, and they are very good at orienting themselves. So we're here in the middle of the woods, and nobody is concerned about where north or south is. They know, and I know that they know. So he just is very good. But the young generation, the 25-year-old today, they cannot live without Google Maps, okay, or maps or any form of that. It's just they just they're just impossible. They cannot go to the shop, like a supermarket. They go every week to the supermarket. They can't go now. And by the way, DoorDash is making that even worse because now you don't even know where the supermarket is that okay? So so truly, if you don't use it, you lose it, and that's another part of this optimization and boundaries that you develop trust in a. So you have a relationship with DoorDash now. You don't have it with Market Basket. Is DoorDash, and you don't have it with Whole Foods and so on. So we developed the relationship with institutions. But I just want to highlight something that is interesting about humans. If you lose trust of an institution, so if the Central Bank of the United States starts doing, by the way, they are going to make a decision soon, no? The 21st. So anyway, so so if they start making stupid decisions that are politically based, and we lose trust in the Fed, it's going to take ages for us to recover that. We do not trust institutions in the same way that we trust people. Happens to me that I'm in an airplane, I'm talking to a person, they know an MIT professor, they chat with me, they laugh for a while, and then they ask me for investment advice. I say, you have to be kidding me. I say, like, what makes you think that I know anything about investment? I might know about measurement, but I don't know how to put the money. Are you kidding me? And so it is so interesting that we just develop trust immediately, especially Latins. Is that okay? 5 minutes in a bar, that's your best friend. You will be hugging after 5 minutes in a bar. So, so we have this ability to connect with people. Um, so we develop these boundaries super fast. We develop the trust relatively fast. Um, but institutions, we are very slow. So in our economy is relying more on institutions to develop the trust than humans. So when you back 20,000 years ago, we actually sat after the dinner, we sat around the fire, and the elderly were telling advice and giving advice to the young. The young wanted to pay attention because the elderly have survived, life expectancy, so they have something to say. So we don't talk. Those communications are not taking place today. People are not even paying attention to the wisdom that comes from experience. And in fact, your kids are young, but when they get teenagers, then you will realize that they don't pay attention to you. And you just have to wait. I mean, and in fact, this is one of the things that we humans have to say that, again, your boundaries, you have to trust they will learn. And when they're 24, they come back and say, wow, what a lovely daughter I have. Yeah. It does happen. It always happens. So what epoch is looking at what are those activities that we do as humans, those tasks that we do that are based on this control, trust, small data sets, boundaries, definitions, and so on. And what is interesting is that what we do is what we did was to take all these words that are related to these characteristics that allow us to work differently, okay? And we measure them. And we believe that this is not going to be replicated in a computer because it's super imperfect and it's super inefficient. We are in the World Cup now. We have 48 teams. Do we really need 48 teams? This is crazy. A computer will never choose this. Never, never. A computer will actually decide it's just stupid and it's a bad investment and it's a waste of money. We should just have very few teams. And in fact, they will never have Cote d'Ivoire playing Spain. I think it was Cote d'Ivoire the one that played Spain yesterday. So no, yes, I think it was. Yes, let's see. Yeah, yeah. No, no, I think no, I don't remember. I have to check to do this properly. So yeah, Cape Verde. Yeah, Cape Verde, Cabo Verde. So Spain was playing Cape Verde yesterday. This would have been an unthinkable game for a computer. A computer will say this actually makes absolute no sense. Spain is either the top or the second best team on earth. Cape Verde is the 60 or 90th team on earth. They should never play together. It's an inefficient thing. And surprisingly, the game ended 0-0.
Yeah. But
Beautiful.
that doesn't give you that much information, right? Like I guess it's
Exactly.
inefficient if yeah, yeah.
Exactly. So it is. So at the end of the day, we play the game because we care. Because there's a tiny percentage chance that is. By the way, Spain was favored like 1,000 to 1. Okay, in the bets, it was plus 1,000, something like that. So they were expected to win. Everybody's expected to win, and at the end of the day, surprisingly, it actually made sense to play the game. So the epoch is trying to measure this at the task of individuals, and then hopefully we can take this also um, to syllabuses of what our education system is teaching. But these are the aspects that we humans do that are related to the fact of how we use our machinery. And a computer will not be able to replicate this because there's no purpose. There's no purpose of relationships. So relationship, we do it because we want to develop this relationship. We feel that are important to us, and we use it to communicate. A computer will find far more efficient just to collect all the information of advices and then do some statistics on that. So, so I think that this is what we are going to concentrate in the future. So, our jobs are going to be full of, creativity, about relationships, about being present, about having empathy, compassion, about having hope and leadership, and thinking strategically. Um, these things we don't always use them correctly, but this is what makes us human, and that's how we develop the relationship. So we're trying to do that measurement, and hopefully we can collaborate with you, Ben, in actually implementing this in the labor markets because I think it's a great opportunity, and firms I think they're thirsty for a good answer. And again, this will be looking at the labor market differently. It's not about cheap. See, we're not trying to find what is cheap. We're trying to find what is useful, and
Yeah,
therefore
and
it
uniquely
requires
useful. I
and
mean, yeah,
uniquely useful.
I think it's such a useful framework in terms of thinking about the collection of tasks that are uniquely suitable to human capabilities and like the structure of the human brain. I think you put that really well. But one final question for you, and thank you so much for being generous with your time. Final question is like, what do you think? As that evolves, as that adapts, and we start becoming more epoch. The jobs become more epoch, and we are complementing machines in some ways. What do you think that will teach us about humanity, about the nature of the human brain?
Oh, well, I mean, so no, no. So that's a great question. So I really don't know how this is going to evolve in our brain, but it will put more emphasis on the kind part of humankind.
Yeah, well, let's say we are wrong about that, and let's say that that machines. become very kind and we rely on them for kindness. I mean, it's a crazy situation, but let's just like, entertain that like, absurdity for a minute. And then would that then give us information that, humans are not what we thought, that we are actually, that our actual unique value comes from something different?
Yes. So that will be the case. Yes. So so it is the case of the following: if we can replicate all the goodness and badness of humankind in a computer system, okay, we really have to question ourselves: what are we doing here? Truly, because if I can replicate this, it is. However, I do think that that would be very difficult to replicate. You know, the sense of I mean, I love the U.S. man. And I mean, it's clearly that was not born here, but I love this country in dearly. This country produces the best behavior exactly at the 11th hour. It's just remarkable. The ability to reinvent this economy has always been remarkable. This society is always thinking about somebody else. The kindness that we show after a natural disaster is inspiring. The ability to work collectively in the worst of the moments is inspiring. So I cannot imagine that this is something that can be replicated. I mean, it can be given as an order. I understand that you can find collective action like an autocratic government where I tell you what to do. It doesn't feel the same, isn't it? I don't think that someone that has been subject to repression, which kind of said, well, this is what is good for everybody, so you just follow orders, is different when you convince everybody that that is the path. And the United States has convinced itself and everybody else about what is the proper path toward prosperity. That I cannot find how can that be engineered versus collectively and socially decided. Best decisions of humankind have been made because we added something to the data. So when we stop slavery, it's because we added, justice and equality to thousands and thousands and thousands of years and billions of observations that actually said otherwise. When we decided to give votes for the women, no, we gave vote for women not because we had good evidence. It was just because we thought that it was important to add something to that world that we were creating. That creativity, that willingness to judge and reinvent eh, requires this collective action. I mean, people do not reinvent themselves just because they order to. And anyone that has a parent will know that. There's a difference that starts to take place between the ages of 7, 8, 9, around that time, when the kids do not follow orders, that you have to become someone that is a leader. And I don't think that that can be replicated. You see, the leadership of autocracy can be replicated. The leadership that comes from the example, the conviction, the compassion. 90% of the world believes that there's a supreme being that is somehow asking us to be better. I mean, forget about if he's planned or not, but I think that everybody feels that we can be better. Every student that comes to MIT that might be super successful, they always tell me when they're 50, 55 years old, they say, well, I want to give back. Why you want to give back? Why? And by the way, I find it really good that they want to give back. But they want to give back because they feel that they are something more important than themselves. That shift from individualism to thinking about them, everybody else, all the others, is quite inspiring in this country. And I cannot imagine that can be order. Is that okay? But many autocratic governments have tried to do that in the past, and it never works. I mean, it works for a little bit, but then people said, well, this is not the way. So that's why I don't think we're going to replicate it. Is that okay? Because it's actually the satisfaction of doing that collective. I mean, watch the World Cup, watch the Olympics. When the US won the World Cup, the gold medal in hockey, I was surrounded by all Americans, okay, when that game was playing. And they said I was the biggest fan that the United States had in that meeting. And I said, yes, of course. Like, I am a US citizen. This country has accepted me. I am part of you. I mean, I just have a different accent. And by the way, there were people there from North Carolina say, by the way, you also have an accent.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, you might be surprised, but you do. So I said, so we are all different accents. And it's just that this ability of collective joy is something that is very difficult to replicate. I mean, I don't know if you're a dog or a cat person or an animal person, but the joy that a dog brings to the owner is just unique. It's unique. And that cannot be ordered. That cannot be fate. And so that authenticity, I think, is what makes us very different. So I am absolutely convinced that we will play a role in humankind. But if there are things that are going to be we can replicate in a computer, then we have to think harder about what our role is. It has to do a lot with community, by the way. That's the best one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that sounds very right. It's very inspiring. I mean, I hope we get there. And I also share your optimism of that. And I think it would be very surprising if it went a different way, if we didn't have that as a uniquely human value.
Yeah. No, we're going to screw up in the meantime, and transitions are costly, but we will get there. Yeah, yeah. But so probably we are not going to see it. Well, I hope you see it, but probably I will not see it. But at the end of the day, I am not doing this for me. This for my grandkids. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you
Yes.
so much for being part of
No,
the
thank
show.
you.
Yeah, really appreciate
No,
it.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was fun. Thank you so much.
The Economics of Work is brought to you by Rebellion Labs, workforce data for research and benchmarking. If you enjoyed, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. It'll help us reach other curious listeners. I'm your host, Ben Zweig. Our producer is Cole Wagner. Thanks for listening.